There are certain pitfalls that come with having fame or being in the public eye. One of the most obvious and recurring detriments of a life of fame is usually having ugly private disputes and conflicts become open public discussions. Many celebrities have struggled with exposing their private lives to public scrutiny, especially when such private situations are told out of context. One of the celebrities that this public criticism affected was Mariah Carey, after she was accused of refusing to pay for her dying sister's hospital bill. While that sounds quite horrible, stick around to hear the full context of this chaotic story. Mariah Carey is a multiple award-winning singer and songwriter. She was born in 1969 in Long Island, New York, to a family of an African-American father and Irish mother with two much older siblings, her sister Allison and brother Morgan. Her father was in the military and her mother was a voice coach in an opera house. Mariah inherited her mother's gift for music and began pursuing it early. In 1988, when she was 19 years old, Mariah made her debut on the music scene. Her debut was notable as she managed to get Tom Mottola, the head of Columbia Records, to listen to her tape. Mottola was quickly impressed and even battled another recording agency to sign her. Under Columbia Records, Mariah was marketed as the label's main female artist, which put her in direct competition with artists like Madonna of Sire Records and Whitney Houston of Arista. And at the 33rd Annual Grammy Awards, she won the awards for Best New Artist and Best Female Pop Vocal Performance for her single Vision of Love. Her exposure at the Grammys led Mariah's debut album to top the Billboard 200 for 11 consecutive weeks. She was on top of her career game, and all seemed to be going well. But things were not as rosy in her private life, especially when it came to her relationship with her siblings, as a storm that had been brewing for years began to spill over. Before diving into what conspired between Mariah and her siblings that ended in her appearing to abandon her dying sister, let's first take a look at the history she had with her siblings and her family in general. Mariah's parents, Patricia and Alfred, met in 1960 and fell in love. This was 7 years before the events of Loving Day happened, when the Supreme Court allowed for the legalization of interracial marriage in the United States. So, you can imagine that their relationship was quite troubled. Patricia's parents were strongly against the union, but that didn't stop the couple from getting married. They soon had their first child, Morgan, a boy, and their second 2 years later, a girl named Allison. Following the birth of his children, Alfred enlisted in the army because he believed that being in the military would earn him the respect society failed to give him as a black man. That, however, was not the case, as while working at the military base, a white woman living at the base accused him of raping her, and he was promptly locked away. It was a few years before he was proven innocent and let go. With Alfred failing to get proper social respect, his interracial family suffered greatly, especially his children. Morgan and Allison's childhood was plagued by racial prejudice from white and black people. Not only did the children witness society's constant wrongs toward their father, but they also had to be careful of their actions to avoid harassment. When they went out in public, they would usually only be seen with one parent at a time. If they happened to be out together, they approached their predominantly white neighborhoods separately. Their mother often went ahead with the kids, and their black father would come in after them. The two children experienced a lot of persecution, like watching their family car get blown up and their neighbors throwing raw meat infused with glass at their dogs. Society's constant mistreatment and Alfred's trauma from his time in prison soon took their toll on the once happy marriage, and Alfred and Patricia eventually separated in 1973. All these had happened when Mariah was very little. At the time of her parents' divorce, she was only 3 years old. Her brother Morgan was 13 and her sister Allison was 11. Mariah didn't experience the same extent of racial harassment her elder siblings faced. In addition, she was born with light skin and light, loose-curled hair, which made it possible for her to pass off as white. When the family split, Morgan and Allison went to live with Alfred, and Mariah lived with their mother as a little white girl enjoying white privileges. She was even allowed to go to Patricia's family events, which Morgan and Allison were excluded from by their grandmother because their skin and hair were darker. These privileges marked the beginning of sibling resentment. Morgan and Allison began to envy the life their little sister lived. In Mariah's biography, she recalls that her brother Morgan grew up angry and was often getting into trouble. When describing her siblings, she said that both of them were smart and often had good grades despite their social challenges. Allison was smart, beautiful, and a bright girl. However, as the family began to live separately, relationships grew cold, not just because of the distance in location, but also the obvious difference in social circumstances. At age 15, Allison got pregnant by a soldier. After much contemplation, it was thought best that she should marry her baby's father, which she did. After marrying him, she moved away to the Philippines, where her new husband was stationed. This divided the family even more. On seeing her older sister becoming pregnant and becoming an aunt herself at the age of 8, Mariah vowed to herself not to follow in Allison's footsteps. It made her teenage years quite prudish. Allison later returned from the Philippines with her son when she was 20 years old. Neither Mariah nor anyone else in her family knew what happened to her while she was there. But in her book, Mariah writes that her sister had changed and her aura was different. Gone was the calm, beautiful, intelligent Allison. She was now rougher around the edges. Though Mariah noticed these things about her sister, she was only a 12-year-old girl that had not seen her sister in a while. After Allison's return, they began to hang out, but Allison and her state didn't have much good to offer her younger sister. Mariah recalls passing out because of Valium her sister fed her, and also recalls getting left in the company of a shady man that proceeded to touch her inappropriately. To make matters worse, Allison had tried to pimp her out for money, poured scalding tea down her back, resulting in third-degree burns, and had once offered her cocaine. After these incidents, Mariah reduced her time with her older sister. Allison continued down her destructive path after returning to Long Island without being able to find a job. She soon began to sell her body for money and drugs. In 1985, she remarried and had her second son in 1987. In 1988, she tested positive for AIDS, and in 1989, she divorced her second husband. With her daughter on a steady destructive downward spiral, Patricia decided to step in and visit her daughter and grandson. The sorry state she witnessed the boy living in caused her to wage a custody battle against Allison. By this time, Mariah had begun to gain recognition on stage. She tried to help and support her sister with the money she was earning. She paid many times for Allison to go to rehab and therapy, and while sometimes she managed to make some progress, she would usually fall off the wagon. Though her brother Morgan, who had once worked as a music producer, was doing quite well, Mariah was the one making the most money in her family. In her book, she said that she was often treated as an ATM because of how frequently she handed out money to her immediate and extended family. Mariah tells of how she looked out for Allison's kids. She set up a trust fund for Allison's sons and paid for Sean, Allison's first son, to receive an education at Harvard Law School. Today, Sean is a Harvard graduate and the Vice President of Business and Legal Affairs at Major League Baseball. Sean and Mariah, being only 8 years apart, are still very close, and he is considered a member of her inner circle. As the years passed and Mariah's relationship with her siblings worsened, they often said things to the media about her private life, which Mariah did not appreciate. Then in 2011, she released her autobiography, The Meaning of Mariah Carey, and a legal battle began between Mariah and her brother Morgan. He sued her for defamation. This was because, in her book, she wrote about him growing up angry and about an explosive fight he had with their mother over being allowed to take her car out. She also wrote that she often felt like she had to protect herself and her mother from her brother. Morgan was not pleased by this depiction of him. Following this, Allison also sued Mariah for over $1 million because of her claims that she had been fed Valium by her sister and passed out. The legal battle was quite intense and public. In fact, Mariah's family issues have been public since 1994, when her mother fought her sister for custody of Sean. 5 years later, in 2016, her family issues went public again when her sister made a video begging Mariah to help her out with her medical debts as she was dying. Mariah, who at this point referred to Allison and Morgan as her ex-sister and ex-brother, received a lot of criticism. First, this was because many people thought her to be heartless and stingy, as the singer was close to having a $400 million net worth at the time, and her refusal to assist her sister in paying necessary bills appalled the public. Second, many of these people knew next to nothing about her history with her siblings. Morgan also, during that time, publicly referred to her as a monster. He also went on to say that all Allison was asking Mariah for was change to her, especially since her fiancé was a billionaire. But despite the heavy backlash, Mariah remained firm in her decision not to help her sister. Fortunately, some of her fans and other members of the public were on her side. Others recalled that Allison's first son, Sean, was also doing quite well financially and had not stepped in to help his mother. Eventually, the story stopped making headlines after creating massive amounts of uproar. There you have it, the deep-rooted reasons that caused Mariah Carey to abandon her dying sister. What do you think? What would you have done if you were Mariah? Leave your opinions and thoughts in the comments section below. Thanks for watching, and remember to like the video and subscribe. Until next time.